There's a road in Ohio that should never have been built, a place where the rules of the world don't apply. Route 666. It's not listed on any official maps. It's not in any guidebook or GPS system. Some say it doesn't even exist at all. But the people who live nearby, those who are still alive anyway, they know better. They've seen it, driven it, and they know one thing. If you find it, you may never make it back. The air around Route 666 feels wrong. The moment you take the turn off the highway, you can feel it, like the road itself is alive, waiting for you. The wind stops. The trees grow silent. You can hear the hum of your engine, but you don't hear the world around you anymore. You just hear your own breath, growing shallow as something unseen watches you. And once you're on it, the road starts to bend and twist in ways that don't make sense. The sky goes darker. The road stretches out longer than it should. And if you look back, you realize you've already gone too far. You can never find your way back. Every sign you see, every mile marker, they don't add up. You could drive for hours, even days, and still be stuck in the same spot. No one has ever driven it once and made it back the same way. Some people say they've seen cars in their rearview mirrors, headlights closing in like a threat, but when they checked their side mirrors, the car had vanished. Only the darkness remained. And then there are the stories of people who've driven the road only to disappear entirely. No wreckage, no bodies, just nothing. But those who come back, they're the worst ones to talk to. They come back with empty eyes, hollow stares, and voices that speak in tongues. They talk about the road as though it's not a place but a thing, something that watches, something that decides who gets to leave and who doesn't. They tell you not to go down Route 666, not because it's dangerous, but because it has its own rules, and breaking them could cost you your life. And yet, despite the warnings, people still go. Some people are drawn to it, almost compelled to find it, like a moth to the flame. But there are 5 rules, 5 terrifying rules, that if you follow them, you might make it out alive. Rule number 1, if your headlights flicker, do not stop the car. Do not check the engine. Do not look behind you. Keep driving. The first time I heard this, I thought it was just a local legend. But then I drove the road myself. The headlights in my car began flickering, just like the locals warned. I looked down at the dashboard, my fingers ready to twist the knob, to check the engine, to find the source of the shuddering flicker. But then I remembered the rule. Don't stop. Keep driving. There's something behind you, something in the darkness, something that wants you to look, wants you to stop. It's always waiting. The moment you give in, the moment you stop to check, that's when it gets you. And whatever it is, it's close. You won't see it. You won't hear it. But you'll feel it, the chill that crawls across your skin, the weight of eyes on your back. Never stop. Keep your eyes on the road and keep moving forward. Rule number 2, if you see a hitchhiker in old-fashioned clothes, do not slow down. No matter what they say, no matter what they look like. If you make eye contact, you are already dead. I saw her on the side of the road, standing still in a patch of dead grass, her clothes old-fashioned, too old-fashioned. The world around me seemed to grow quieter, the sounds of the engine and the road fading as I slowed down, instinctively, to offer her a ride. I almost didn't see her eyes, those deep, hollow eyes. But when I did, I couldn't look away. Her stare felt like it pierced straight through me, like she saw something no one was ever supposed to see. Then, as if she sensed my hesitation, she spoke. Her voice was sweet, almost like it didn't belong to her. Too calm, too inviting. But I remembered the rule just in time. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator and sped past her without a second glance, my heart hammering. When I dared a glance in the rear view, she was gone. Not a shadow, not a sign, just the empty road behind me. But something stayed with me, something I can't shake. That night, when I tried to sleep, I kept hearing a whisper. It wasn't my name, not exactly, but it was too close, too familiar. Rule number 3, you will hear a tapping on your window. Do not roll it down. Do not look to the side. Ignore it. It wasn't until I hit mile marker 13 that I heard the first tap. Soft, almost delicate at first, like the lightest touch on glass. Tap, tap, tap. Then louder, more urgent, like someone begging for attention. I wanted to turn my head. I wanted to see who or what was there, maybe try to help them, because that's what decent people do, right? But something stopped me, a cold, gut-wrenching dread. It was like I could hear it. Don't look. Don't look. Do not look. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to keep my eyes on the road, forcing my foot to stay steady on the pedal. The tapping grew louder. It got faster. I don't know how long it lasted, but I didn't look. I didn't roll down my window. And when I glanced to the side of the road, the figure was gone. But I could still hear it in my head. The tapping, the pleading, the whisper. It never stopped. Rule number 4. If the radio turns on by itself, you must hum along to the song playing, even if you don't know it, even if it's just static. I remember hearing static first. At first, I thought it was just a glitch in the system, but then the sound began to shape itself into something. A melody, a haunting tune I had never heard before. I thought I was losing my mind. The song was wrong. It was something between words and noise, something that felt ancient, and it sent a shiver through me. I tried to turn it off, to silence the growing panic, but the knob wouldn't budge. The static grew louder, and then, as if the car itself were speaking, the song became clearer. It was calling me. I started humming along, just like the rules said. My throat felt tight, but I kept humming, feeling my pulse racing with each note. The moment I fell silent, the car lurched forward, the wheels screeching across the road as though something had just taken control. The hum in my throat died in a rush of breath, and in that silence, I lost something. Rule number 5. If you see a sign that says end of the road, turn around immediately. You have gone too far. If you ignore it, you will never see the outside world again. I didn't see the sign at first, but then, as I rounded a sharp curve in the road, it appeared, shrouded in mist and fog. The sign, an old rusted metal plate, read end of the road. And right then I knew. I'd gone too far. The rules, they weren't just suggestions. They were the difference between life and death, between freedom and eternity. But I couldn't turn back. I couldn't stop. Not now. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, the lines on the asphalt disappearing into the thick, oppressive fog that had descended. I had ignored the sign. I had broken the rules. And now, as the world around me seemed to tighten, I realized there was no way out. The car felt heavier. The tires scraped against the road in a way that didn't sound right, like the car was reluctant to move forward. I pressed my foot down harder on the accelerator, trying to push through, but the fog only thickened. It was a suffocating, cloying kind of fog, the kind that made you feel like you were drowning even though you could still breathe. The world outside had gone silent. No birds, no wind, not even the faintest hum of distant traffic. The only sound was the hollow hum of the engine and the rhythmic thumping of my heartbeat in my chest. Then, as if from nowhere, the headlights flickered. A sharp flash, a sudden blackout of light, then back again. The road before me vanished into a void, leaving only the outlines of dark trees, their twisted branches reaching out like claws. I clenched the steering wheel, trying to steady my hands, but they were shaking uncontrollably. The road, that sickeningly familiar road, was still there, but now it felt like it was changing. The headlights flickered again, longer this time, and I remembered the first rule. Do not stop. Do not check the engine. Do not look behind you. The warning flashed through my mind in a blur of panic. I had heard enough stories, enough warnings from the locals to know what happened if I gave in. But even knowing that, I still fought the urge to glance behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a deep, primal sense of danger creeping up my spine. Something was there. I could feel it. I kept my eyes fixed forward, my grip tight on the wheel. The sound of the flickering headlights was all I could hear now. It was like a whisper, like a beckoning, urging me to stop. I clenched my jaw, biting down hard, determined not to fall victim to the curse that haunted this road. Then came the tapping. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, but with each tap, it grew louder, faster, as if someone or something was desperate to get my attention. The sound was maddening, coming from the driver's side window. I swallowed hard, every instinct in my body screaming at me to look, to see who or what was there. The rule burned in my mind like a brand. Do not roll it down. Do not look to the side. Ignore it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout out in fear, but my mouth felt dry. I felt my eyes watering as the tapping grew more frantic, more insistent, as if it knew I could hear it. There was something about the tapping, something unnatural about the way it echoed in the car. It didn't belong. It wasn't the sound of a person's fingers. It was almost too rhythmic, too precise, like it had been rehearsed. I swallowed again, forcing myself to focus. The road before me stretched on, the fog swirling thick in the headlights. I couldn't make out any shapes, no signs, no markers, just the white line of the road and the oppressive mist that seemed to smother everything else. The tapping continued, louder now. It was like it was coming from inside the car, Not the outside. It was getting inside my head. Don't stop. Keep going. My heart raced as the tapping reached a fever pitch, and then, suddenly, it stopped. Gone. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was the feeling of being watched. I couldn't see anyone. I couldn't hear anything. But someone, was there, right beside me. And that something knew I was breaking the rules. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing the car faster, desperately trying to outrun the darkness that seemed to be chasing me. The tapping was gone, but the silence that replaced it was far worse. The silence was suffocating. I couldn't escape it. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The road behind me stretched on, endless and dark, just like the road in front of me. But something else caught my eye. A figure, a silhouette, just beyond the dim glow of my taillights. A figure standing still, watching me. It was a man. I couldn't make out any details, but his shape was unmistakable. He was tall, almost unnaturally so, his outline sharp and rigid, like he didn't belong in the world at all. I couldn't see his face, but I knew he was staring right at me. His presence was oppressive, suffocating, like he was pulling the air out of the car with every passing second. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I forced myself to focus on the road ahead. I wasn't supposed to look. The rule was clear, but I couldn't help it. Something in me needed to know who or what was back there. I glanced in the mirror again. The figure was gone. But that didn't mean the terror was over. It had only just begun. The fog seemed to grow thicker, the headlights flickering again, and that's when I saw it. The road had changed. There was a sign. A small wooden post, barely visible in the fog, but it was there. A rusted old sign that read, "End of the road." My breath caught in my throat. I knew the rule. I had broken it. I had gone too far. The locals had warned me. Turn around immediately and go back. But something in me, something I couldn't explain, refused. I was already deep in. I had to know. I couldn't turn back now. The fear that gripped me didn't come from the road or the figure or the tapping. It came from something else, something inside me, something that told me I had no choice but to press on. I didn't want to look back again, but I couldn't stop myself. I stole a quick glance in the rearview, and there, just behind me, was the figure once more. He was closer now, his face still a blur in the shadows, but I could feel him there, like he was inches away from me. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. It was like the car itself had trapped me in a cage of silence. The figure took a step forward, and that's when I felt it. The car lurched, the engine sputtered, and the lights went out. Complete darkness. The darkness swallowed me whole, the headlights nothing more than dim ghosts in the abyss. I slammed my foot on the brake, but the car didn't slow down. It seemed to lurch forward, as if something was pushing it. I couldn't even see my hands on the steering wheel. My pulse pounded in my ears, and the air inside the car felt suffocating. My breath came out in shallow, ragged gasps as I tried to force my eyes to adjust. But there was nothing to adjust to, just black, an endless, oppressive blackness. Then, a sound, a whisper, a soft, slithering noise from the back seat. My skin crawled. I didn't need to look. I knew. I knew something was back there, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't breathe. I yanked the steering wheel, desperately trying to keep control, but the car seemed to move as if it had its own mind. It veered to the left, cutting into the thick fog. No road, no markers, no signs, just the same suffocating blackness. The radio flickered to life. The sharp static hit my ears like a jolt of electricity, making my entire body jerk in fear. It wasn't the usual noise of an old, faulty station. This was something different. Something alive. The static settled into an eerie tune, one I didn't recognize. The melody was haunting, out of place, like it had been ripped from the air itself. But it wasn't a song I could simply ignore. It didn't matter if I didn't know the words. The rules were clear. The radio was playing on its own, and the rule told me I had to hum along. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the radio out of the dashboard and tear it to pieces. But my body wouldn't obey. The cold sweat that soaked my back was only overshadowed by the icy grip tightening around my throat. I couldn't help myself. I hummed. The sound was a low, involuntary rasp. It didn't feel like me anymore. It felt like the car was pulling the tune from my very soul. I hated it. I hated every second of it. But the music, that static-infested song, became the only sound in the car. It filled my mind, drowning out the tapping, the whispers, the fear. The melody seemed to grow louder, more insistent, like the song wanted to consume me, drown me in it. It felt like the car itself was moving faster, the air inside growing colder, heavier. Then it happened again. The headlights flickered once, twice, then they went out completely. The fog outside deepened, thickening like smoke, wrapping around the car as though it were alive. I couldn't see a foot in front of me now. The song on the radio warbled, distorting into a twisted, guttural noise. My breath came in short bursts, and I was trembling now, my fingers frozen on the wheel. And that's when I heard it. The tapping. It started as a soft sound like a distant drum beat, but it didn't stay that way. It grew louder and faster. No, not a drum beat. It was something else, something much worse. My heart hammered in my chest as I fought the urge to look. I couldn't. The rules. Ignore it. But I couldn't. It was unbearable. It felt like the tapping was inside the car now, echoing against my skull. It wasn't just on the window anymore. It was everywhere, in the walls, in the seat, in my bones. The tapping stopped, but only for a moment. A whisper curled in the back of my mind. A voice. No, not a voice. A command. Look. The hair on my neck stood straight. The voice wasn't from the radio. It wasn't from the car. It was from within me. And it wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a request. It was an order. I wanted to resist. I wanted to scream and fight it. But my hands moved before I could stop them, reaching for the window. My fingers brushed the glass, cold and slick with condensation, my own breath fogging it up. The car felt heavier now. It was as if it was sinking into the road, into the dark abyss below. I could feel the floor giving way, the entire world crumbling around me. Then, with no warning, the window rolled down on its own. I hadn't touched it. A cold breeze hit my face, and I saw something standing in the mist. A figure. Not the same figure as before, but this one was worse. It was tall, unnaturally so, with skin pale as the moon and eyes that were just too wide. They were hollow, empty sockets that burned with an eerie glow. And it wasn't just standing there. It was moving closer. I wanted to scream, to roll the window back up, to speed away and forget any of this had ever happened. But I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The figure stepped forward, its limbs jerking unnaturally, each movement sharp and painful looking, like it was too big for its own body, too twisted for this world. It opened its mouth, and I knew that what it would say would not be a simple word. The tapping returned, louder, faster, more frantic. The figure reached a hand forward, and its fingers, clawed, twisted, jagged like broken glass, touched the edge of the open window. And that's when I saw it, the reflection. But it wasn't mine. The window had become a mirror, a dark, warped reflection of what lay behind me. I was looking into a twisted version of the car. The figure's face was there too. It grinned. I snapped my eyes back to the road, but the fog had thickened again, the headlights still out, the radio blaring with static. The tapping was louder now, coming from everywhere. I could feel the weight of it pressing on me. And then, the worst sound of all. The radio turned off. Suddenly, dead silence. No tapping, no whispers, no fog, no static. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Then the lights flickered on again, bright, blindingly bright. And I saw it. The sign. It was right there, just ahead, illuminated in the harsh light. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. End of the road. But it wasn't the sign that terrified me. It was what was standing next to it. The figure. The same one from before. Its eyes locked onto mine. And for the first time, I felt its hunger. I could feel my heart pounding so hard, it was as if it might explode. Every instinct screamed at me to turn the wheel, to escape, to get away from whatever had locked me in this nightmare. But my hands were frozen. My foot was glued to the gas pedal, and the car seemed to be moving on its own, inching closer to the sign. The end of the road. The air around me thickened, suffocating. I could barely breathe, but I couldn't stop. The headlights, now blinding in their brilliance, cast grotesque shadows on the road ahead. I could see the figure clearly now, standing there like it had always been. Its skin was pale as death, stretched thin over bones that seemed too large, too sharp. It had no mouth, just a gaping, hollow space where one should have been, a black void that seemed to pull in the very light of the world. I couldn't look away. My eyes were glued to it, drawn in like a moth to a flame. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat, trapped in a prison of terror. The sign loomed ever closer, the letters practically burning themselves into my retinas. End of the road. No, no, no. Something wasn't right. The road should have ended, but it kept going. The fog, thick and impenetrable, swirled in on itself like a living, breathing entity, closing in on the car from every direction. I should have turned around. I should have obeyed the rule. But I didn't. I couldn't. The sound of my own breathing was deafening now, my heart beating louder than the engine, louder than the world outside. The figure stood motionless as I neared it, not moving an inch, but its eyes followed every inch of my body, its hollow gaze burrowing into my very soul. It was waiting. I could feel the presence of something behind me. I didn't have to look. I didn't want to look. But the compulsion was growing. I needed to see it. I had to know what was behind me. The rules, those twisted, suffocating rules, I had ignored them all. Then the tapping returned. Sharp, rhythmic. My fingers twitched, pulling the wheel harder to the left. I tried to turn away, but it felt like the road was closing in on me. The sign was now only a few feet away, its edges sharp, its words mocking me with their finality. I could hear a faint, almost inaudible voice, whispering, coaxing me closer. But it wasn't a voice. It was something worse, something that crawled into your mind, squeezing at your thoughts like a vice. I had reached the edge of the road, and then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Someone, was standing next to the car, beside the passenger side. A figure in old-fashioned clothes. A man. A woman? I couldn't tell. The shape was distorted by the fog, by the shadows. But I didn't need to know who they were. I knew what they were. I froze. The rules. Rule number 2. Do not slow down. Do not look at the hitchhiker. Do not make eye contact. But I couldn't help it. I looked. Their face was obscured, but the eyes, those eyes burned through the fog like a spotlight. So dark, so cold, they didn't belong to any human. Their stare, empty and hollow, fixed on mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. I had made eye contact, and I knew, deep down, that I was already dead. The fog around the car thickened, pressing in on the windows, on the windshield, until I could barely see anything at all. The engine sputtered, struggling. The car groaned, fighting against its own will, as if it was a living creature, caught in a battle between the rules I had broken and the terrible forces it had unleashed. Then came the tapping, louder, faster, more frantic. It wasn't just on the window now. It was everywhere. On the door, on the roof, on the sides of the car, on my skin. I didn't know how much longer I could keep my hands on the wheel. I didn't know how much longer I could keep the car moving. But somehow, I was still driving. The road was gone, replaced by a swirling, formless void. The car was no longer moving forward. It was being pulled, dragged deeper into the darkness, into the end of the road. I thought I saw the figure reach toward me, its hand outstretched, long fingers curling into claws. It wasn't reaching for the car. It was reaching for me. A scream ripped from my throat, but it was swallowed by the silence. The radio clicked on again, its eerie static filling the car, its noise warping and distorting into something that didn't sound human. It hummed a tune, the same song from before, but now the song was darker, more twisted. It wasn't just static anymore. It was alive. The tapping didn't stop. It wasn't even tapping anymore. It was a scratching, a tearing sound, like nails dragging across glass, sharp and jagged, raking against my sanity. The car swerved violently, the steering wheel jerking in my hands, the wheels screeching against the asphalt. I wanted to stop. I wanted to get out. But I couldn't. The rules held me in place. And then it happened. The road, it vanished. There was no more road, no more sign, no more figure, just endless, infinite darkness. The static on the radio became deafening, drowning out everything else, consuming the car, my mind, everything around me. I tried to scream again, but my throat was raw, as if the sound was being ripped from me. And then I saw it. A face, my face, staring at me from the fog. It was twisted, wrong, disfigured beyond recognition. It grinned at me, a smile that stretched too far, too wide, its eyes filled with nothing but emptiness. I had gone too far. I had broken all the rules. And now there was no way out. The car stopped moving. The world around me froze. And in that frozen silence, I realized something that hit me like a physical blow. There was no going back. I would never leave this place. Not now, not ever. And as I sat there, trapped in the suffocating blackness, I knew the end of the road was only the beginning, and I had just stepped into it. The suffocating blackness closed in around me, the air thick and stifling, pulling every breath from my lungs. I was still frozen in the car. My hands clutched white-knuckled around the wheel, my eyes locked onto that twisted version of my own face, staring back at me from the fog. It was grinning, wide, too wide, its smile distorted, wrong. It wasn't me. It couldn't be. The static from the radio had turned into a low, groaning hum, as though the very sound was alive, shifting, morphing into something that wasn't quite a voice, but something worse. It gnawed at my thoughts, pressing in, pushing against the walls of my sanity. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The fog pressed tighter, swirling like a living thing, its cold fingers brushing against the windows, the car, my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break free of this nightmare, but my mouth was dry, and the sound wouldn't come. The rules were choking me. The rules had bound me to this road, this place where nothing made sense anymore. I felt it then. A tug at the car, a pull, like something was trying to drag it further into the dark. My tires spun uselessly against the ground, but the car didn't move forward. The wheels were spinning in place, dragging me deeper into the void. It wasn't the road anymore. There was no road. There was only darkness, stretching out forever, and I was stuck in the middle of it, unable to move, unable to escape. The figure in the fog, the twisted, warped reflection of me, took a step forward. The air shifted, and with it the faintest whisper, a voice that crawled inside my head. You should have turned around. The words were like claws scraping against my skull, cold and sharp, digging into the very core of my being. I had gone too far. I had ignored the rules, ignored the warning signs. And now I was trapped. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. The car felt smaller, the space around me tighter, as though the very air itself was closing in. My pulse quickened, my breath coming in shallow gasps. There was no escape. Then the tapping returned, not from the windows this time, but from inside the car. Tapping on the roof. The sound was slow, deliberate, like someone was methodically tapping their fingers against the metal. It wasn't just tapping, though. It was like something was scratching, dragging its nails across the surface, sending shivers down my spine. I didn't want to look, but I could feel it. I could feel the presence above me, something standing over the car, its gaze piercing through the roof, through the steel, straight into my skull. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, the side mirrors, but there was nothing there. No sign of life, just more darkness. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what would happen if I broke the rules again. If I gave in, if I looked, I didn't know. I was losing myself in this place. Then the voice whispered again, softer now, its tone like a lullaby, calm, coaxing. Look at me. I froze, my body locked in place. I didn't want to look. I couldn't. But the voice, the way it curled around my mind, the way it promised, I couldn't resist it. It wasn't my reflection in the fog anymore. It was the face of something else, something older, something evil. I wanted to scream, but my lips wouldn't move. The voice inside my head, the voice that wasn't mine, was louder now. You're so close to the end. The words twisted in the air, growing louder, pulling me toward them. I could feel the car moving again. The wheels finally gripped the road, but the road was wrong, like something had shifted beneath it. The familiar hum of the engine had turned into a low growl, as if the car itself were protesting, struggling against whatever force had taken hold of it. It wasn't a road anymore. It was a trap. The tapping, still on the roof, was faster now, more frantic, more desperate. It was coming from someone above me, just inches away. I closed my eyes. I had to close my eyes. The car lurched again, as though it were being dragged, pulled against its will, deeper into the thickening fog. I could hear the whispers now, hundreds of voices, all speaking at once, drowning out everything else. The voices twisted and contorted, tearing at the edges of my mind, until there was nothing left but the sound of my own heartbeat, racing uncontrollably in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I had to look. I had to. I forced my eyes open, and there it was. The face, still hovering in the fog, its eyes locked on mine, filled with an emptiness that stretched for eternity. It was waiting. I tried to move, to do something, anything. But my hands were frozen, the car glued to the road, the wheel now slick with sweat. I could feel the weight of the rules bearing down on me, pushing me toward a fate I couldn't escape. And then the radio blared to life. The static returned, louder this time, overpowering, deafening. It wasn't just static anymore. It was something worse. The song that had played earlier, distorted, mangled, like it had been torn from the very fabric of reality, began again. But this time, it wasn't a song. It was a chant. The voices in the static grew louder, chanting in unison, an ancient guttural sound, pulling at the edges of my mind, tearing through the walls of reason. I could feel it now. Whatever had been waiting for me. It was here. The figure in the fog began to move again. its limbs stretched and twisted unnaturally, its body elongating, distorting in ways no human form should. It was no longer just a figure. It was a presence, a force that was swallowing the light, the air, the very road itself. I was losing control. I was slipping away. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even move. The world around me twisted and writhed, as though reality itself was bending, warping, collapsing under the weight of the rules I had broken. I had gone too far, and then through the fog I saw it. A sign. A new sign. The words were clear now, glowing with an unnatural light, burning themselves into my mind. You are here. The words, "You are here," burned into my mind as the fog continued to choke out everything around me, pulling me deeper into a void I couldn't comprehend. The car was moving now, but it wasn't moving under my control. The road was gone, replaced by a shifting, blackened abyss. My hands were glued to the steering wheel, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. I had crossed the line. The whispers inside the car had become a cacophony, a symphony of voices, some speaking in languages I couldn't understand, others just muttering my name, over and over, a chant that grew louder with each passing second. The radio static was still there, screeching through the speakers like 1,000 tortured souls crying out in agony, their voices merging with the whispers, their pain intertwining with my own. I had broken every rule. I had ignored the signs. And now, there was no turning back. The headlights were flickering, the dim light casting eerie shadows across the walls of fog. But I didn't dare stop. I didn't dare look behind me. Every fiber of my being screamed to turn the car around, to fight against whatever this was. But I couldn't. I couldn't break free. I looked out the window, half expecting to see something, anything that wasn't part of the endless fog, but all I saw was a black, shifting mass. It was like the world itself was closing in, pressing against the car, suffocating me with every passing second. The fog was alive, moving, crawling across the surface of the earth like a creature that had no form but its own hunger. It was waiting. And then I saw it, in the corner of my eye, barely visible at first, but growing clearer with every blink. The figure. It was a person. But not. Not really. It was wearing clothes that were out of time, old-fashioned, like something from a century ago. A silhouette in the fog, standing just beyond the reach of the headlights. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribcage. I knew the rule. Do not slow down. Do not make eye contact. But it didn't matter. The figure was staring at me, its eyes burning through the fog, locking onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach turn. It was impossible to look away, even though I knew better. The moment our eyes met, the world seemed to stop. The static from the radio died, the whispers in my mind ceased, and everything fell into a suffocating silence. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare at the figure. And then, slowly, it started to move toward the car. I knew I was breaking the rule. I knew I had already sealed my fate. But it was too late. I could feel it, the pull. The figure was coming closer, its movements too smooth, too unnatural, as if it were gliding rather than walking. The mist around it seemed to part, as if it were anointed with some unnatural power. I couldn't stop staring at it, even though every instinct I had screamed at me to look away. The tapping started again. This time it was louder, more urgent, coming from the driver's side window. I didn't look. I couldn't. But the sound was maddening, like nails on a chalkboard, dragging through the car's frame. My hands were shaking, my palms slick with sweat, but the car was still moving forward. I couldn't make it stop. I couldn't stop this nightmare. The figure was so close now. I could see its face, distorted and stretched, a grotesque parody of humanity. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, filled with something dark, something I couldn't name, something that made my blood run cold. And still, it drew closer. The tapping on the window grew faster, more frantic, as if it were begging me to let it in. I couldn't let it in. I couldn't break the rule, but I could feel my will breaking. The weight of the rule, the weight of the terror crushing down on me was too much to bear. And then, through the fog, I saw it, a sign, a new sign, glowing in the distance, its words clear and bright despite the darkness that surrounded me. End of the road. I slammed my foot on the brakes. The car screeched, but it didn't stop. It was as if the road itself had a grip on me, pulling me forward, forcing me toward that final terrible sign. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what was waiting for me beyond it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. The rules had warned me, but it was too late. The figure in the fog was right beside the car now, its face pressed against the glass, its breath fogging up the window. I couldn't see its mouth, but I could hear it, its voice. Soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent, more demanding. It wasn't speaking words. It was whispering something that crawled into my mind, like 1,000 tendrils wrapping around my thoughts, dragging me deeper into the darkness. Look at me. I felt it again. The pull. It was a force beyond anything I could understand, beyond any rule or reason. The figure's hand, cold, dead, reaching for the window, tapped once more, this time with a finality that made my blood run cold. The hand wasn't human anymore. It was something else, something that had never been human. The static from the radio was back, louder than ever. It wasn't static anymore, though. It was a voice. The voice. The voice that had been speaking to me all along, the one that had whispered in the dark, the one that had been coaxing me forward, deeper into this hell. The voice had a name. You're too late. The words rang in my ears, echoing through the car, through my head. They didn't make sense, but I could feel them. I could feel them sinking into my bones, into my soul. And then I realized it wasn't the fog that was suffocating me. It was the road. The road had a hunger. I looked back to the sign. End of the road. But there was no turning back now. There was no escape. There was nothing left. The car moved faster, yet the road seemed to stretch endlessly before me, twisting and curling like a serpent. The headlights flickered again, and this time I didn't even flinch. I didn't need to look behind me. The fog had thickened, swallowing everything whole. The road had changed. It wasn't the road I had driven on earlier, the one I thought I knew. This place felt different, alien, as though the very earth beneath my tires had morphed into something else. Something that didn't belong to our world. I had gone too far. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The whispers had returned. No, not whispers anymore, but words. Words that slithered inside my head like worms, curling around my thoughts. I couldn't make them stop. It wasn't just the figure anymore, the one I'd seen in the fog. No, it was the road, the very road that seemed to call to me, beckoning me deeper into its grip. And there, at the edge of my mind, was a voice, the voice. You cannot escape. I slammed my foot on the brake. The car didn't stop. It refused to. The road, the cursed road, had a hold on me, and nothing I did could break it. The radio was still playing, that same static-filled tune, now warped and broken. The song had become a chant, a twisted hymn that seemed to echo from all sides, rising and falling in pitch like the breath of some unseen beast. I couldn't hum along anymore. I couldn't do anything. Then something shifted in the distance. A figure appeared ahead, just beyond the fog, and I knew. It was her, the woman from the sign, the one who had warned me, the one whose face was etched in the back of my mind, a figure from a time long past. Her clothes were old-fashioned, ragged, as though she had been trapped here for eternity. Her eyes were wide, wide enough to swallow the world whole. She moved toward the car, her feet never touching the ground, as though she were floating, her gaze locked onto mine. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. Her presence was overwhelming, like gravity pulling me toward her. The fog parted around her like an opening to hell itself. You shouldn't have come. Her voice was soft, but it wasn't just her voice. It was everyone's voice, every tortured soul who had been here before. It was the road's voice. You ignored the rules. You ignored the sign. Now you belong to the road. I tried to speak, to beg, to scream, but nothing came out. I couldn't even move my hands, couldn't even shift my foot from the brake. The car was no longer mine. It was hers. The road had taken it. The figure reached out, her hand brushing the windshield. Her fingers didn't leave marks, but the glass warped, rippling like water, as if her very touch could twist reality. The world outside the car was beginning to change, to bend. The fog grew thicker, darker. The mist began to take on shapes. Eyes, faces, mouths, screaming, crying, pleading to be heard, trapped within the walls of the fog, never able to escape. It's too late, she whispered again, and the car lurched forward as if it had a mind of its own. My heart raced in my chest, a frantic beat, but I still couldn't move. I was trapped. The road had consumed me. In the distance, the sign that had warned me, that simple, terrifying message, "End of the road," began to glow brighter, its letters sharper, clearer, like an omen I should have heeded long before. But it wasn't just a sign anymore. It was a gateway, a portal into something far worse. The sign was no longer just a warning. It was the final destination. I could see it now. The end of the road wasn't the end at all. It was the beginning. A beginning of an eternal nightmare, a place where no one could escape. The figures in the fog, the ones I had seen through the mist, now reached for the car. They were no longer just shadows. They were real, real and hungry. I felt my stomach churn, and in the corner of my eye, I saw her again. The woman. She wasn't smiling. Her face twisted in agony, as if she had been here for so long that her very soul had been shredded by the road, broken into pieces, each piece yearning for release. But there was no release, not for any of us. You will never leave. Her voice broke through the fog, low and guttural. The road had already claimed me. The car jerked again, and I looked forward, seeing nothing but darkness now, darkness that stretched forever, infinite and consuming. My heart powder in my chest, blood thundering in my ears, and still I couldn't move. I couldn't turn back. And then it hit me, the realization, the last rule, the one I had ignored, the one that should have been the most obvious. I had passed the sign that said, "End of the road." I had ignored it. I had pushed forward, thinking there was something else, something waiting for me just beyond. But now I knew. There was nothing left. The road had no end. It was endless, stretching out into a horizon that never came. A road that wrapped itself around the world, around reality itself, forever. I had crossed the point of no return. As the figures in the fog reached for the car, their faces twisted in agony. I felt something cold and ancient grip me. The fog swirled around me, the air thick with the scent of rot and decay. The woman's figure was now standing outside the car, her face pressed against the glass, her eyes wide, her hands reaching for me. You are one of us now. The fog closed in around me, and the road had no end. And I finally understood. I was never supposed to leave.